would like to also take note of apologies that were tendered for this meeting. Mr. Ntanzi, are you aware of any?
Chair, I've received one from the CEO who's also struggling with load shedding. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We'll note that. Any other apology for this meeting? Okay, if none, then we proceed to take the two items together, which is the health and safety as well as the ethics moment. Over to you, Mr. Ntanzi, if you can assist us.
Thank you, Chairperson and members. Just to remind all of you that COVID-19 is still a reality, and you are encouraged to remain vigilant and adhere to all health and safety protocols. Those that are working in their office must adhere to health and safety guidelines and familiarize themselves with the marked nurse evacuation routes. When working from home or away from office, it's important to ensure that the working environment is safe, secure, and that your virtual private network is turned on in order to protect NARSA system. Thank you. Chair, the theme for this month is agility and innovation. Agility and innovation are fundamental for the growth and success of organizations. It refers to an organization's level of responsiveness, its ability to change and adapt. Innovation is the development and implementation of new processes, services, and service delivery standards to improve efficiency and effectiveness. Agility and innovation requires us to have productive meetings, create a space where all views and ideas are heard and ventilated. Create an environment that embraces and encourages experimentation, learning, and improvement, promoting a humane, trusting, and respectful culture. Bring an end to uncoordinated silos strategies involving more people in workshops and discussions. Embrace technology, making use of all available IT tools. Expose ourselves to cross functions using techniques, coaching, advanced training, and development paths. We are therefore encouraged to be more agile and innovative in the execution of our duties and to find solutions that improve efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ntanzi. And we now move on to the adoption of the agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, please note that 5.1 and 5.2, which are the minutes and matters arising, will be considered in the next meeting. So those two items are withdrawn. And then also item number 19, I think the title there is misleading. The document that is attached there, which is supposed to be considered in a closed meeting as a governance matter, is the one on the regulatory mapping for hydrogen gases. And it is for noting, it is not the ROMCO GTA1 tariff as indicated in the title. Please, if you can kindly correct that. And just to then check with Mr. Ngumalo if the GTA1 ROMCO tariff was supposed to be here and if it is here, because I can't see it on the list here. Mr. Ngumalo.
Thank you, Chairperson. The GTA ROMCO tariff is will go to the next meeting. We actually had prepared it, but it will go to the next meeting. It is certainly not here.
Okay, all right. With that said, then let's see if there's any other proposed change on this agenda. None. Members, with the proposed changes, are you happy to then adopt the agenda, to approve the agenda for this meeting by show of hand? Thanks, Mr. Mkwena. Supporting Mr. Mkize, Mr. Gumede, I also support the agenda as proposed with the changes that were indicated. We then move on to the declaration of interest. Members, the forms have been uploaded for members to note the interest they may have on the agenda items. And members are encouraged to fill in those forms and send them to the Secretariat. By exception, do members have any interest to declare? None. Okay. All right. We then move on straight to item number 6, which is the initiation of an investigation in terms of Section 4D of the Gas Act. Please take the matter as read and highlight the key issues that you would like members to pay attention to.
Chairperson, maybe let me take this quickly. This is a request to initiate an investigation on an incident of gas leak that occurred. This one was in Witbank at a pressure reducing station that is owned by Social Gas. The incident was reported to NASA on the 19th of January, 2022 this year. What happened was that a security guard apparently observed bubbles on the water ground where the pipeline is located. And then he alerted the social maintenance team. Within the applicable 48 hours, the NASA team was then advised. I think members will recall that we had indicated that this type of interruptions are reportable within 48 hours. So it was reported within the 48 hours. The NASA team did visit the location on the 27th of January just to gather preliminary information and facts on the gas leak. And when they got there, according to information that was obtained, it would appear that there was a third-party contractor who was working in the area. And there was also corrosion on the valve. And that is really the reason why the pipeline had a problem. But one thing that was noted there, which is quite important, is that in terms of remedial action by Social Gas, they were delayed apparently by members of the community there who wanted to be part of the repair team. I think this just points to the dire nature of the situation with regard to unemployment out there, where people, start getting the impression that when there is a repair work to be done by a licensee, that they need to be part of that, and then, they disrupt the operations if they're not included. So it's something that Social Gas is actually paying attention to in terms of just engaging the community around that area to educate them around the importance of, not interfering in this type of repairs to ensure that they are done within the time. But the purpose for the investigation, then Chairperson will focus on the root cause and whether any customers were affected, but also the financial implications of the whole incident. As members would know, we always do that, but also just to detect and ascertain the volumes that basically were lost, and the impact of that, potentially, if there was any, in relation to public health issues. Chairperson, those are the issues. And then we've attached Annexure A, which is the investigation plan. And that shows the scope of the investigation, the resources that will be utilized, and the time that will be taken. And ultimately, then we recommend approval of the initiation of the investigation, Chairperson. I think those are the highlights in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngumalo. Members, the matter is here for discussion. If you have any input, guidance, and any thing that you would like the team to improve on when it comes to these investigations. By show of hands, members, if you have any input or comment on this matter. Suppose that's Mr. Mkize's. Oh, sorry. Someone's hand was up and down again. Mr. Mkize, I'll start with you. You may go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks for the presentation, Mr. Ngumalo. Just two issues. One is that I don't think the issue that is being raised around communities wanting to participate by hook or crook in such intervention, in such instances, it's a new phenomenon. It's even more dire when you are closer to the ground. So I think it's something that somehow, in terms of our regulatory advocacy, we need to talk to this issue. It goes with the whole issue of lawlessness, as well as yes, the socio-economic conditions of the populace. So it is something that I think needs to be flagged in this. I mean, coming out of this report, and then secondly, from my side, I think it is important to be holistic in terms of these investigations. I've long stressed the issue of collaboration with other parties, so that also there is no reliance solely from the clients as well as the supplier only, because the bargaining power of the supplier vis-a-vis clients is skewed. So you wouldn't expect those that are actually clients to be forthright in everything necessarily. So I think it's important to note other parties or authorities or other bodies to collaborate with, or that could be of assistance, just to keep that, to include that as part of the standard. And then two, to also, I mean, linked to this matter is that they should also include the resources required. You know, I think we need to thoroughly think deep around that, because if we're talking of digitization, it doesn't necessarily mean the Internet of Things only, but it also needs to have the right tools and the necessary sophistication. Should there be such a need to do this work with excellence? That is all from my side, but I support the initiation of this investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Any other contribution from the members? Okay, we can then respond to, let me go to Mr. Mkwena. Mr. Mkwena, please go ahead.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members and everyone. Two questions, Chair. One is a process one, perhaps that one I will make a proposal or a request. And the second one, the first one, Chair, has to do with the plan that has been developed. If you look at the table on the cost estimate on page 15, there's a cost estimate there. I would assume, as I would perhaps understand it, that that does not include salaries of persons. But are these estimates as reflected cover the entire investigation until it closes, or it covers just a specific trip to the site? I think that's really my question, Chairperson. The second, Chairperson, let me phrase it as a way of a request. I had raised this matter before, that considering other jurisdictions, initiating an investigation is not a matter that is even considered by a committee. A competent person appointed to do such is doing that without really receiving and initiating permission from the existing bodies. So my request would be, could there be an investigation, not really an investigation, but a possibility that this matter could be decided by the full-time regulator member? As a matter of fact, in this agenda, we've got two agenda items that point to that particular aspect. I know this is mentioned in the Act in terms of the regulator itself, But I thought that maybe if there could be some concrete feedback on the matter from the legal perspective and delegation perspective. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Mr. Ngumalo, if you can please respond, and then I will also go to RSU with regards to the last question from Mr. Mkwena. I think if they can consider that under standing instructions by the ER for delegating these matters, since we have dealt with them for a number of years now, if that can be, they can be delegated to the FTRM. Mr. Ngumalo.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think on Mr. Mkhize's points, I think they were mainly just suggesting proposals and mainly enhancements. And I think I do agree with the observation that the situation out there is actually pretty bad in terms of the level of desperation. And I think advocacy, I do agree, Mr. Mkhize, that would be ideal in just dealing with some of the issues. But I think in addition to that, what we're planning to do is to then partner with the other role players, as you mentioned, including the licensee itself, just to make sure that when we conduct our own workshops, because we do have stakeholder education and public education workshops that we conduct annually, that we do involve as many of these communities as possible so that we can structure our presentation and our content around dealing with this type of issues to make sure that the outreach out there to these communities is actually attained and that we deliver the message regarding the importance of not interfering in operations, number one, but also the dangers of that continuing to happen. As you said, it's not a new thing. It has been ongoing for a while. But also then to sensitize communities around the issue regarding, for instance, there's been situations around the attempted theft of petrol. We know that some of the gas pipelines have been tampered with and damaged, where people were hoping to see from the gas out of them. So I think we'll be focusing on those matters. And then with regard to the resources required, we will be, as I said, partnering with the other stakeholders, but also just bolstering our own internal resources. Then moving to Mr. Mkwena's questions, the cost estimate that is reflected on page 15, Mr. Mkwena, I think that appears to be just for the one visit, because that would also include costs such as, the traveling for those employees, but also the claims that would come of that. So they certainly would not cover the entire thing. They would need to be adjusted. And then in terms of the last one, the initiation of the investigations, I think we can liaise with RSU again, but it's something that can be done, certainly. We can even maybe at the next meeting make a proposal.
Let's leave it to RSU. That's why on that specific one, I said we will get Mr. Ndanzi or Mr. Chokwe to respond to that.
To deal with it. Okay, yes, that's fine.
All right. It has always been the decision of the energy regulator, but we have dealt with these matters. Now we can improve efficiencies. And I said, could they be considered by the energy regulator so that we get approval from the energy regulator through the delegation matrix, so that we consider these as standing instructions. If I can get a response from Mr. Chokwe. You can mute yourself, Mr. Ngumalo.
Thanks, Madam Chairperson, and good morning. Indeed, we may, when we talk to the division and all other divisions, we may actually get to the point where all those issues, Chairperson, that have been addressed before we put them under standing instructions. But I think we just have to emphasize that the standing instructions, as actually Madam Chairperson is aware, those are the decisions of the ER or subcommittees that we want members to implement, because individual members can be delegated to perform any functions of the energy regulator. Those functions have to be done by either subcommittees or ER, but as Madam has just said, we will make those to be part of implementations where members can actually take them forward. Thanks, Chairperson. When we do the revision of the direction metrics that we are actually planning to do with other divisions, we will actually factor those and they will be approved by ER as you have correctly put. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chokwe. Let me take Ms. Grabe.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, members, colleagues. Chairperson, I just want to alert the committee that should the proposal about changing the reporting of the initiated investigations differently, it might have an impact on the IPP, because currently the IPP for the current IPP, but also the new IPP says that these things are considered by the PGS. What I will do from my side, and I will also liaise with the EM, I will just check with an internal audit to give us advice that if the board approves it, and that will be obviously approved in the new financial year, that it will not impact on the audits of our performance targets because of a decision. So all that we can, if we add evidence that the board decided to change the delegation authority, hence the document or the report is no longer considered by the PGS, that would be fine. But I just wanted to alert the members of it, but I will liaise with RSU and the EM. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grabe. I'll get to Mr. Mokoena, but I wanted to just indicate that the part that we have we are talking about is just the step one, if I may put it that way, which is simply to say that there must be a decision of the regulator in terms of how it has exercised its discretion, where it also needs to show that there was a reasonable suspicion in terms of how it has carefully exercised its discretion. But that first step of determining whether there's a reasonable suspicion to investigate a particular company will now be done, or it is one where the committee requests that it be delegated now to one person. But as it will be delegated as a decision of the ER, because we have dealt with these matters before. So when similar matters come before the ER, then the one person will simply be implementing the decision as it is similar to what the regulator has approved previously. So it's not the investigation itself. The APP doesn't talk to initiation, it talks to the investigation. So once the initiation is done, investigation will be proceeded with, and then the report will serve in the committee, but not the first step, which is the initiation. That's where the difference is. Mr. Mokoena?
No, Chair, I just wanted to mention the point that with all the points that have been made by Mr. Chokwe and Ms. Grabe, they are well understood. As the point that Mr. Chokwe is indicating, perhaps may not be, in terms of the Act, it's not possible to delegate to an FTRM. But my sense is that we need, our values this month is agility. Anything that will fast track the decision on this matter will be useful. If it's the REC, let it be the REC. If it's a FTRM, let it be an FRT. So let just be investigated and come back for us for a decision to recommend, as you rightly say, recommend to the energy regulator. Of course, the timing will count, as Ms. Grabe is indicating. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mokoena. All right, thanks so much. Members, we're now getting to the recommendations, and then I will read them out for you. The first one is that the subcommittee is requested to approve the initiation of an investigation in terms of Section 4D of the Gas Act, concerning the gas leak that occurred at the Ferro Bank pressure reduction station, and that the committee is requested to also approve the investigation plan as attached. And in that investigation plan, there needs to be clarification or enhancement around the table on page 15 regarding the costs that are reflected there, so that it is very clear what those costs cover. And then the third recommendation which we are adding is that the committee is requesting RSU to consider approaching the ER in terms of delegating initiation of investigations to be implemented by the FTRM. So those are the three recommendations, members. By show of hands, if you then approve these recommendations, subject to obviously the enhancements that were proposed by the members regarding the collaborations with other authorities for preventative measures on these kind of things. Thanks, Mr. Mukwena, Mr. Mkizen, Mr. Kumete. I also support. Thank you so much, members. We move on then to item number 7. Item number 7 relates to a closeout on the investigation into gas leak that happened in the distribution pipeline in Pretoria West. Please take the matter as read. Remind members about the cause or the facts that led to that investigation and what are the outcomes. And now in this report, what action will then be taken as a result of that, if you can take it in that manner. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson. This one is a closeout report, as you said. So we have investigated this matter. It was based on an incident of gas supply interruption that was reported to NERSA as required. And the team investigated the matter. Just quickly, in terms of the facts, is that the pipeline was damaged by a third party. Apparently, there was a contractor performing work in the area who failed to actually observe wait leave requirements. And in the process, then they damaged the pipeline. Then in terms of the impact of the incident, we have established that 2 customers are actually connected to this pipeline. And we've contacted the customers just to verify whether or the extent to which they were affected. And then one of the customers has indicated that at the time that the gas incident or the supply interruption occurred, the operations were actually halted because it was performing other maintenance work, so it was not affected by the gas supply interruption. The other customer indicated that it's got a dual use facility. At the time of the incident, they were actually using the alternative fuel, which is LPG, and not the gas. So both customers did confirm that they were not affected by the gas supply interruption. The only party that was affected appears to have been Social Gas, who obviously had to incur costs in terms of repairing the pipeline that was damaged. And those costs were quite minimal and compared to other costs that they've dealt with in the previous years. And we have actually consulted Social Gas with regard to just confirming that those will be taken out of their budget and that there will be no financial implications in terms of customers with regard to those costs being passed through. The second point that we need to mention around the impact on Social Gas is with regard to the gas that was leaked. And they indicated that it was less than 6 gigajoules. So again, there was fairly a minuscule amount of gas that leaked. And the value of that is just under 400 rand. So it was not a lot of gas. Chairperson, in terms of the remedial action, just quickly, the pipeline was repaired by Social Gas, the maintenance team. And the ground in the area where the pipeline is located was also rehabilitated because that's one of the requirements, the rehabilitation of the ground. And in terms of measures to ensure that this type of incidents are prevented in the future, the licensee has indicated that it will conduct pipeline safety awareness campaigns just to make sure that all the people that are going to be performing work, be they contractors or other employees in the area, are aware about the presence of the pipeline. And I think they've also committed to re-erect some of the pipeline markers that were there that might not have been visible, to make sure that the location where these facilities are is actually marked properly. And then they've also indicated that they will be doing door-to-door campaigns just to get deeper into the communities, to talk to them regarding the presence of pipelines, particularly in the informal settlements, because one of the observations that they've made is that they're beginning to see a lot of informal settlements that are mushrooming or sort of being created in areas where there's these pipelines. So they're going to engage directly with those communities to actually alert them to the presence of these pipelines.
Okay.
Chairperson, there in terms of the recommendations, we're recommending the approval of the closeout report, and that further just monitoring action will be applied in terms of just following up to make sure that the commitment that social gas has made are actually carried out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Numalo. Members, the report is here for deliberations and input from your side. If there's any input, comment, guidance, how the team can improve on these investigations, and perhaps also the appropriateness of actions that are taken to prevent this, and also perhaps what members may indicate as cost implications. By show of hands, members, if you have any such input. Mr. Mkhize?
Just one quick one from my side. Is on page 7 when there's reference to point D there in terms of remedial action and consequence management. I think in terms of D, there's a need for the regulator to actually collaborate with licensees and this licensee in this case being Sasol Gas, to educate and create awareness in municipalities and communities through which the pipelines, these various pipelines, traverse. I think it's important to not leave it just to the licensees to do that, but to do it in conjunction with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Mkwena?
Chairperson, my questions, let me first congratulate the presentation because it covered all the 4 out of the 5 questions I've asked. I was going to ask about the transgressor, switching to LNG and minimum loss for Sasol and the actions thereafter. So those have been answered. The only question that I do have, ma'am, it's a terminology one. Can somebody explain to me what is a way leave requirement? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Mr. Numalo, may you please respond?
Thank you, Chairperson. Maybe just to start with Mr. Mkhize. Yes, Mr. Mkhize will certainly collaborate with the licensee. I think as we indicated in the previous submission, it's part of the plan, indeed, to work with the licensee in their engagement with these communities and all other relevant stakeholders. With regard to the way leave, what a way leave is, Mr. Mkwena, is basically an agreement, a signed undertaking by the licensee that if anyone wants to actually get into an area for performance of any construction work, they will first get permission from the licensee, who's the owner of the facility concerned. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what the way leave is. It basically just, underscores the fact that the facility that is there, it's owned by a particular company. So if anyone wants to do work in that area, they need to first get permission from the licensee. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, so basically the licensee, I think the main thing there is to protect its interest around the infrastructure that is laid in that specific location, so that they make sure that no damage will be caused on that infrastructure. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Members, perhaps Mr. Ngumalo, if also, because you made mention of the work that has been done, I think the committee has emphasized on the need for this maintenance work to that the team must always, in fact, in all of the reports, as I also indicated, that we need to quantify the maintenance work and associated maintenance cost incurred. Like, for instance, in this case, the repair work that has been done, there must be evidence of how much it was spent on this, and also so that then when they determine the tariff and the maintenance costs that are allowed in that tariff, at least they will be able to see, how much of that was used for this type of work when these problems arise. So I think it's something that, again, must be included in the reports as indicated previously. All right, members, we then move on to the recommendations, and the recommendations are on page is it? No, the page is page 10, the overstamped pages or numbers. The PGS is requested to approve the closeout report into the gas leak that occurred in Pretoria West distribution pipeline, and also note that this pipeline will be included in the 2022-2024 compliance inspections, just to check the progress on the unidentified third party responsible for the incident. And also, I think in the future reports, the team must quantify maintenance work done, as well as the cost of maintenance and repair work that has been incurred. Members, by show of hands, if you agree with those recommendations and approve. Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Thank you, Mr. Kumede. I also approve. Mr. Mkhize, are you also happy to approve? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. We then move on, members, to the next item, which is the final assessment of Kwande Gas Pty Ltd's application for a maximum price of gas. The period is October 2021 until June 2022. Seems we are left with only few months on this application, and I'm hoping that the team, because this is the new entrant in the gas market, hoping that the team will engage with this licensee to assist it with the next application that we are expecting. Members, Mr. Ngumalo, if you can introduce the matter for members' consideration.
Thank you, Chairperson. This is the final assessment of an application by a company called Kwande Gas for a maximum price of gas, and that's for the period October 2021 to June 2022. We received this application in November 2021, Chairperson, and as we indicated, Kwande is a first-time applicant. They will be importing gas from Mozambique, and that gas is the reason why basically they need a maximum price. They're applying for a maximum price that is reflected under paragraph 5.4 and on table 1 there, and which is with its respective components. Kwande is applying as a third-party trader, and Chairperson, table 2 just shows the different components, particularly with regard to the cost of gas, and those components are confidential, so I will not mention them. but it reflects the components in terms of the acquisition costs, the exchange rate that has been applied, because Kwande will be purchasing the gas in US dollars, and the figures are indicated on that table 2, as well as the costs of the in rand terms of the gas. Chairperson, the trading margin calculation is shown under table 4, and the trading costs are detailed under table number 5. I think the one thing again to emphasize is that they are using the JKM plant in the determination of the maximum price. And we've provided a comparison of the calculations made by NESA as well as Kwande. That is under table number 7. And that shows a variance that is really within the acceptable threshold of 10%, so that there's no problem there. And the other thing that is worth highlighting is that the higher variance that you see of almost 9% is on the trading costs, and that resulted from the difference in the treatment of the assets as well as on the work. And the concerns that were noted by the PGS during the debriefing are detailed under paragraph 6.20 to paragraph 6.33. We've also included the responses by management to the issues that were raised by members. Chairperson, there are no issues that are really significant to raise in as far as this application is concerned. And then in terms of the recommendation, obviously, we're recommending that the PGS should recommend the application to the ER for approval, that being the application for the maximum price, as well as the reasons for decision that are attached under Annex A. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. Members, any questions on this submission by show of hand? Mr. Mkwena, please go ahead, followed by Mr. Kumede.
All right. Sorry, I was mute. Chairperson, just to ask a question as part of the recommendations, and that has just been mentioned, the period of 1st October 2021 to 30 June 2022. Now that we are considering this matter now, as we speak, 10th of March 2022, how are the timelines this approval is going to be effective for between day 1 and day last? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Mr. Kumede, followed by Mr. Mkize.
Good morning, Chairperson, again. Chair, I must admit, at a theoretical level, I don't have a problem with this, with the recommendation. I just have a problem with paragraph 6.28. Chair, I think for me, the issue is that, you know, when an issue is raised, and I want to raise, I wasn't sure whether, because this to me, I was a bit doubtful whether to raise it on this platform, because it's actually it's actually perhaps more, I'm not sure it's a governance. I know it's a regulatory issue, but it's about how we deal with this regulatory, with the methodology. But I'm going to raise it, Chair, that there is a conclusion there that's raised. I can't see how that conclusion, to me, that conclusion, how it arrived at, it seems to say whatever thought that may have gone into looking at this at the principal level, in terms of regulatory costs and possible double counting, is that instead of it being dealt with properly somewhere else, it comes out here. And I'm not sure whether it is firstly appropriate and secondly whether it is correct. I'm going to explain it this way: that in terms of my understanding of certain tariffs, is that especially in terms of recognizing regulatory costs, that a margin which is almost equivalent to what we call a gross profit or a profit that is added to the costs, in terms of regulated activities, that margin is in fact a regulatory cost. Now, it could come in one of two ways. Is that cost could be recognized by setting a rate of return, by allowing a rate of return as calculated with work and all of the how you actually arrived at work. That's one form. But once you've recognized that cost, that profit cost as a cost, you can't then recognize it again separately anywhere else. That is where the actual double counting comes from. So for instance, in terms of, without actually talking to the numbers themselves, but just talking to the principle, once you have a work in terms of the cost, as that table indicates, once you actually have work in as reflected in table 8, you can't then have a trading margin as well, because that for me is in fact double counting. The one thing that I did notice, for instance, in terms of table 8, what is missing for me there are the operating and maintenance costs, which ideally what you should be doing is, if you are going about something in terms of the cost approach, a cost plus approach, is that you have a cost plus approach that basically looks at all of those costs, including the acquisition cost, plus operating and maintenance cost and any other pass-throughs. Then you then decide in terms of how you're going to recognize the margin. You can recognize the margin by actually using work, if there are assets that you can use to actually do that, or you can recognize work by either taking all of those costs and adding a margin, whether it's a 20% or whatever that number, it could be a number that's been agreed in terms of industry, or thirdly, by benchmarking it and simply saying that in respect of that, then you have a benchmark. So if you use the benchmark to actually arrive at a margin, you can't again use work. That's double counting. And I've raised this a number of times before, Chairperson. But I think the way the conclusion was arrived at in terms of 6.28, paragraph 6.28, I'm very uncomfortable with, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gumede, for that comprehensive explanation, and also just showing the rationale there and the unintended consequences. Thank you for that. The team will respond. Mr. Mkhize?
I think I'm partly covered by Mr. Gumede. The only thing that or two things I want to also look into is, when it comes to the trading regulatory asset base, I think we should always state that still that will be subject to a prudency review. As a numerator in the equation, it will tend then to increase the cost should it be overstated, and therefore, unless we've done a detailed prudence assessment, we may state up, like full confidence and approval therein. Otherwise, we need to always state that what the decision we come to is subject to that change, to that prudence assessment. The other thing that I just want to ask from the team is, what are the chances of having a moving average? I'm looking at table 2, where you've got in terms of the rand-dollar exchange rate and other factors that keep changing whilst the price itself remains fixed. And my question is it possible to have apologies for the background noise, it's just a plane flying over. I just wanted to get to know if there is any chance of having this moving average on more frequently, such that the price is not necessarily fixed for the whole period, as we know that the rand-dollar exchange rate keeps fluctuating, and things are very dynamic. If one look at the vagaries of the market to say, what is it? Is there any opportunity that you would have something more, which is a living formula, in other words, instead of a fixed price that is being put forth? That is just my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Mkwena, I take it that it's a lingering hand. They will respond to the question that you posed earlier. Thanks. All right. Can we get responses starting from Mr. Mkwena's questions, Mr. Gumede, as well as Mr. Mkhize?
Thank you, Chairperson. I will, of course, be assisted by the team. But just to start with the question from Mr. Mkwena in terms of the effective date. Yes, Mr. Mkwena, I think we do recognize that at times these applications are actually submitted late, and even the processing and the finalization comes after some time, leaving very little time for the actual implementation. But what actually happens is that in most of them, when they are approved with the proviso that the approved price will remain applicable until a new price is approved by NERSA. So that tends to help a number of these licensees in terms of being able to use the price that is approved until such time that NERSA would have approved the new one. And with regard to Mr. Kumete's question on double counting.
Perhaps Mr. Numa, you can emphasize the need to have this price approved, as the gas will be coming to South Africa, landing to South Africa, and they don't want to delay that importation of these volumes from Mozambique to South Africa. And what is key there is compliance, because once it gets landed here and it is then sold, they must comply with the license conditions in terms of Section 21(1)(p). Hence, then they want to cover themselves for this period. And perhaps the other consideration here is the fact that this company is a new entrant. So it was the first time, it is the first time that is going to trade in gas. And number two, also to formulate its maximum price. So hence I was saying that the team needs to hold the hand of this company and try to make sure that it complies with the license conditions, and also it submits the next maximum price application in time. So what we have before us here is also to ensure that there is compliance going forward, whilst they are trying to come up perhaps with a 2-year application or another 1-year application. Perhaps that kind of additional explanation would also assist. You may also then move on to the next question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. On the next question raised by Mr. Kumeto on double counting, I think one is to agree indeed that that paragraph perhaps could have been better worded, because if you look at the last part of it, it basically refers to some other assessment being done just to confirm that indeed there's no double counting. So maybe it was not appropriate to actually have the first part just asserting that there is no double counting. So we will revise that paragraph, but also do so taking into consideration the extensive guidance that Mr. Gumede has provided on this matter, and I know that he's not doing it for the first time. And then we'll also...
Perhaps in addition there, Mr. Ngumalo, is the fact that even if the paragraph can be enhanced, the principle that Mr. Gumede articulated is embedded actually in the formula. That concern that he's raising with regard to the principle is the one that is manifested in the way that the price is determined. So what we needed to say to Mr. Gumede perhaps is that the PGS has approved a discussion document, and this part of the way in which that price is determined is part of the refinements in that discussion document. So the matter will come back to the PGS, and that's when the PGS will also get an opportunity to make sure that any possible double counting in that formula will be addressed completely when the matter comes back to the PGS for a recommendation to the ER. Otherwise, the discussion document did serve here for refinements on these formulas and the way these prices are determined, including the margin itself. Thanks.
But yeah, Chairperson, I think those are the type of enhancements that we'll be doing on the paragraph, just to indicate precisely what I've just said. But most importantly, to change the wording of the paragraph so that it's not couched the way that it is. I think there was also an issue that Mr. Gumede pointed to with regard to the, on table 8, the operating costs missing on that. I think we'll just do that correction and include the operation cost there, Mr. Gumede. Then proceeding to Mr. Mkize's questions on the trap, we will state that it is subject to prudency as proposed. That is just an enhancement. And then on that table 2, regarding the possibility of having a moving average, I think it's something that we can consider in view of the fact that obviously this price will be dollar denominated, and we know that there are fluctuations in the market. So just to give a sense of what fluctuations are there, perhaps we'll consider enhancing the paragraph in the future to use that moving average. Chairperson, the team can add if there's anything that perhaps I've left out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngumalo. Anything to add from the team? Ms. Makoda?
Yes, Chairperson, I just want to add on the issue of the moving average. Chairperson, we are following the methodology in that it prescribes that the 12-month of the previous period must be used to calculate the maximum price. And therefore, the moving average that will be considered, it may be something that we can add on the review of the methodology, but at this stage, the methodology prescribes that we use the 12-month average and not necessarily the moving average. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, members. With all the improvements of which the team must take into consideration as it refines the methodology, of which a methodology is now out for public comment. When they bring back those matters here, or that the revised methodology, they must make sure that the input given by the members are incorporated into that methodology when it comes back to the committee for a decision. Let me go to Mr. Mkwena before I go to the recommendations. Mr. Mkwena, please go ahead, sir.
Just a quick one, Chair. The answer provided by Ms. Makoda. Could you just explain what's the difference between the moving average and the previous 12 month?
Yes.
What is the difference? Thank you.
Ms. Makoda?
Thank you, Chairperson. In terms of the actual average, if you consider the 12 months from now, it will just be the average. But when you go to the next month, it then means that is the average from the next month to the previous 12 months. So the moving average moves as per the month of a particular period moves, whereas the actual average is just an average of the particular period. Thank you, Chair.
No, you must simplify, don't rush. And perhaps the way to simplify it, just in simple terms, simplify it on the basis of a fixed one. Because if you say it's 12 months and that 12 months will have a period of commencement, you will say it's 12 months from what period, for instance, right? And that will be fixed. Ne? Now, Mr. Mkize is proposing a flexibility that may even
Chairperson, I think you might have gone mute.
Chair, just maybe change your mic. We can't hear you.
Mr. Mkiza, can you assist in the meantime?
Okay. If you are okay with that, Mr. Mkwena, then let's then proceed whilst Kirat is checking on her. Mr. Mkwena, the question actually is more like if you have it over a fixed period and that amount will remain fixed for that particular year. But if you've got a moving average, it's more like to mimic what will actually be happening in the market where there are these rand-dollar exchange rate, the changes. I think in the fuel pricing is revised on a month-to-month basis. And therefore tries to have over recoveries and under recoveries and being able to cater for that in the next month. So it's more like not to have a fixed price, but to have that price being adjusted as the exchange rate changes. So for me, I was just saying that we need to consider that, and I'm happy that they are going to include that as part of to consider it as part of the considerations for the review of the methodology. And then I must say that from my side, I also raised my hand because I was unsure if really there's no double counting with regard to the work vis-a-vis the trading margin. I think you need to improve, and not just the wording only, but to go deeper into explaining why the use of the work vis-a-vis the trading margin does not amount to double counting. So it's more than just changing the weights that are there, and also to indicate that the expenses, the OPEX there includes maintenance and repairs where possible. I think that is where. That is just those improvements. I don't know then, Mr. Mkwena, Mr. Kumete, if you have anything else to add. Any further questions?
Chair.
Thank you, because I want us to move towards the recommendation. Anything, Mr. Kumete?
Chairperson, nothing to add, because I guess what I was then saying here is that because this is a maximum price, and most of these traders actually discount off it anyway. So there's nothing to add, but I think if we need to address that that issue that you've also raised. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is that the PGS is requested to recommend to the energy regulator to approve my apologies. I just got disturbed here. I just got a problem with my iPad, but it's to approve One Day Gas Pty Ltd's application for the maximum price of piped gas energy for the period 1st October 2020 to 30 June 2022, and the decision and reasons for decision attached here too as Annexure A. By show of hands, members, if you support the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I also support. This then concludes.
Chair, could I ask though, as a governance question, seeing that the chairperson of the committee is not available, and also, are we still correct?
Yes, we do, Mr. Kumete.
Thank you.
Thank you. This then concludes item 8. We then proceed to item 9, which is the final assessment of Novo Energy's application for a maximum price of gas for the period 1 May 2021 to 30 April 2022. Over to you, Mr. Numalo.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, we still have a hand up. Perhaps we might address that first. Mr. Mkwena.
Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Or it's a lingering hand. I suppose.
Apologies, Chairperson.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Mabunda is very careful. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Ngumalo, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. On this application, well, it's a final assessment of the Novo Energy's application for a maximum price of gas. I think members might recall that there was a bit of history around this one in the sense that there was a first application that was submitted last year, and it was considered by the PGS as well as the ER, and it was not approved, because there were significant challenges with that first application in terms of the variances that were there at a very high level. And there were substantial disagreements that we had with the applicant in terms of the calculations that had been made. So this is then a revised or amended application. I think members will recall that when the last one was decided upon, Novo was then advised or directed to submit an amended maximum price application. So it is that that they've done now. Chairperson, I want to bring the team in here to just explain the manner in which the variances that were there and the differences that were there between, in terms of calculations between NERSA and Novo Energy, were dealt with, and the outcome of those engagements in terms of and then how those influence the recommendations that we're making with regard to this one. I think members would have noticed that we're recommending that this one should be approved. Thank you, Chairperson. I think the team will then come in just to explain how those variances were reconciled and reduced, and how the differences were basically resolved. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to then also request that whilst presenting, you talk also to the period and how we in future will avoid this kind of a situation, because we effectively will have 1 month of the period the now left. I will leave it at that, because the chairperson is now connected, Madam Maseti, so you may take over after the presentation. Proceed then with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, the overall difference between Novo and NERSA's calculations is 2.4%. The difference is mainly due to the approaches used in getting to the cost of gas. NERSA used the price that is implemented by the supplier, which is Sasol gas across the board, and Novo used the highest price from its suppliers, which would have been applicable in the previous financial year. Chairperson, the second reason for the difference is in the trading cost. NERSA used the updated information in calculating the working capital, the taxation, and the inclusion of a clawback component. Chairperson, whereas Novo used the outdated assumptions in coming up with these components in their trading cost calculation. In the past, Chairperson, NERSA used a threshold of a difference of 10% to determine whether an application was acceptable or not. And in this assessment, as I've mentioned, the difference is 2.4%. Chairperson, in terms of the period, the main issue, Chairperson, is it comes with the process that is followed by NERSA in coming to the final decision. And especially here in this application, there had been numerous engagement, and we have 2 applications in this particular maximum price application. Perhaps it would be an enhancement and something that we should look into as to how then do we refine the period of the application, and how do we then look at it so that to mitigate for factors like this one. Chairperson, we recommend for the PGS to recommend to the energy regulator to approve Novo's maximum price and the publication of the reasons for decision on the NERSA website. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, as well, for stepping in. I have a challenge with my network; it's still unstable. Mr. Mkhize, if you can please step in if I get cut again. Members, can you please give your input as well as comments on this specific application regarding Novo's maximum price? Any comments, any guidance on this, taking into account that the existing methodology is being reviewed? Let me go to Mr. Gumede.
Thanks, Chairperson. The comments that were raised in the previous one still apply, but what we did say in the previous one, Chair, in your absence, was that because we're talking about a maximum price here, is that I would support the actual recommendation, but the comments still apply.
Yes, Mr. Gumede, thank you. Let's hear other members. Are other members happy to then go straight to the recommendations if there are no other issues to raise? All right. Okay, thank you so much. All right, Mr. Gumede, all the comments that were made in the previous application for Kwande and the concerns raised with regard to the principle and the revision of the principle and the methodology to determine prices for the third party traders will be considered and incorporated in the methodology that is under review. Let's now go straight to the recommendations. The recommendations are on page. I just want to go straight to the page. If I may also be assisted by the presenter. All right, it's page 15, the overstamped pages, and the PGS is requested to recommend to the energy regulator to approve Novo's application for maximum price for the period starting from May 2021 until 30 April 2022. And then also to approve the publication of the reasons for decision for this maximum price. By show of hands, members, if you are in agreement with that recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mokwena, Mr. Gumede, Mr. Mkhize. I also support. I'm not sure if members discussed because this price will only be valid for, say, 1 month, and then what happens thereafter. But also recognizing that we have had the team has had some challenges with this licensee, so it is important to deal with compliance issues here. And then perhaps if the regulator approves this price, that will be the price that remains in place until a new price is approved by the energy regulator. Perhaps if we can emphasize that specific decision. Then we move on to item number 10, report on compliance. Mr. Mkhize, do you want to come in before we move to the next item?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I tried to raise that at the beginning, and my understanding is that I think in all of these applications, but the same applies with 10, 11, and 11, is that we need to emphasize the point that this price will remain in place until a new one is approved by the regulator. Let's put it in there as part of the decision and not necessarily just to note it in the RFD. Thank you.
Yes, that is in order. Thanks, Mr. Mkhize. I'm hoping that my summary covers that, so it will then be approved as such by the energy regulator. All right, let's step off that agenda item and then move on to the report on compliance with the license conditions for the operation of gas distribution and transmission facilities. Can we take the matter as read and then summarize the key issues on this submission, and also touch on the compliance with registration production facilities, gas production facilities that are registered, as well as CNG facilities. They are not emphasized here.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start by indicating that this report is in twofold. The first part deals with compliance inspection conducted.
Members, am I audible?
Hello?
Yeah, you were audible,
Because
Ms.
I'm
Maseti, but I think on the last part you were fading a bit, but I think we could still hear what you were saying. I think you were slowing down and showing signs of fading.
Please present the submission, Mr. Mkwena.
Sorry, Chair. I wanted to chip in there that your voice was breaking. I didn't hear anything from my side. So perhaps, Chair, you may want to reposition us, unless if you say that you've got a network problem.
Yes, I'm load shedded, so I'm using some device to hotspot. I can.
Chair, Ms. Maseti?
Mr. Mkwena, for the benefit of yes, Mr. Mkwena.
It's not gonna work, honestly. And if you've got a few minutes, relocate your hotspot and see how best we can hear you. You're really breaking now. It started a little bit better, but now it's really at its worst. So we will then, as you have requested, Mr. Mkhize, just to proceed so that Ms. Maseti relocates herself, please.
Supported?
Mr. Mkhize, please lead us.
Okay.
The chairperson has given a go ahead.
On that basis, proceed. May you just please present the submission?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Let me start by indicating that this report is in twofold. The first part deals with compliance inspection conducted on Sasol gas license facility in the fourth quarter. And the second part reports on the progress made by licensee in rectifying non-compliance made in the first, second, third, and the fourth quarter of 2021-2022 financial year. During the fourth quarter, 10 facilities were inspected and 4 instances of non-compliance on 7 facilities were discovered. These non-compliance findings were due to overgrown vegetation on and around the customer meter station, which poses the risk of fire should the area around catch fire. And then operation of customer meter station with unmaintained equipment, and operation of customer meter station that are not earthed to protect it against ignition arising from static igniting and stray currents, as well as the absence of the gas pipeline marker to indicate the presence of the gas pipeline crossing underneath the hood. In its response to the mentioned non-compliance findings, Sasol Gas submitted its action plan to NERSA, indicating that half of the non-compliance findings have been rectified and a notification has been loaded to rectify the remaining half, and NERSA will be informed of their progress by end of March 2022. With regards to the progress made by licensee in rectifying non-compliance finding made in the first, second, third quarter of 2021-22 financial year, Table 2 in page 17 indicates that Sasol Gas managed to rectify all non-compliance finding made in the first quarter, second quarter, and third quarters. With the fourth quarter inspection included, there was a total of 8 instances of non-compliance in 2021-22 financial year that was discovered, and Sasol Gas managed to rectify about 75% of these non-compliance findings. The remaining 25% are those made in the current quarter, which licensee has indicated that it will provide provide progress report on those one by end of March 2022. We therefore request the PGS to note the report on non-compliance with license condition related to Sasol Gas license to operate the gas distribution and transmission facilities in the fourth quarter, and the progress made by licensee in rectifying the non-compliance finding made in 2021-22 financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions, comments, or guidance to provide?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the reason why that the 25% outstanding. What cost it? I could hear that there is a 75% that has been completed and is complied with. What about the 25%? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Kumete?
Chairperson, again, I was not sure, I may have raised this before, and I'm not sure how to tackle it, whether it's one of the governance issues or it's a whether it's a matter, it's a regulatory matter, but it's a matter for open meeting or not. But I've raised this issue about in respect of technical regulation of gas as a concern for the in terms of the competency of the regulator. That is the body of 9 in terms of how we are supposed to deal with these technical issues. And this is not just gas, I guess it's also in respect of electricity. Is that, the challenge is that, for instance, in gas, and I think I may have declared I've worked with industrial gases for 5 years. So I'm actively selling industrial gases, working with them for 5 years. Is that the one thing that is clear about gas is that once in oil, in retail, we always say there are 3 things, which is location, location, and location. In gas is about safety, safety, safety. And the more of these gas lines and gas whatever come on stream, the greater the concern would be in terms of safety. Now, I'm not too sure our level of competence as the decision-making body. I'm not questioning members of staff that may well come with the same level of qualification, but in terms of the decision makers, whether are we equipped to be able to deal with this matter? I like the idea, Mr. Mkhize, that you raised around partnerships. To the extent to which by the time we get a report here, for instance, people that are dealing with the OSH Act have had, or people that are dealing with standards would have had an opportunity to engage and comment on something. I guess I'm flagging this, that says, whenever I see these reports, and even our focus and emphasis, the question that I ask in the event that we had to have an event, to what extent are we as the members of the regulator, as the body that's supposed to be looking after these items, are we going to be able to stand up there and say, we actually exercise our proper discretion and understanding, and really whatever that, and to say to the public, your safety, you are safe with us. Chair, that has been my concern. And again, apologies if I'm raising a governance matter here, but it is a concern, and I have the question is, how do we resolve it? Yes, we have a report here, but to what extent could this thing be deemed to be assuring the public that we've got their interest at heart, and that we are well equipped to actually address the concerns? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Before you respond, Tabang, I think it's going to be important to also note that this particular licensee, not necessarily looking at the facilities that are involved, it's how they are improving in terms of attending to these matters, and you having repeat findings is something that I think in future you also need to provide, as some kind of an indicator. There is whether there is improvement or there is regression with regard to compliance by a particular licensee involved. I note Madam Maseti's hand as well as Mr. Mkwena. In that order, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Perhaps on this issue that Mr. Kumete is raising, it will be important that we perhaps have our a short workshop on it separately. It is a regulatory matter in the sense that stakeholders might be interested in understanding the regulator's approach in dealing with safety issues, because even when we are still at the licensing stage, you will recall, Mr. Gumede, even with the other license application we have considered, we're supposed to have considered from the gas side and the same applicants applying from the electricity side of things. The issue of environmental authorizations as well as safety issues, they were harped on by stakeholders. So it is important because it's also mentioned in our legislation. However, you are right by saying, to what extent are we supposed to be the regulator that takes safety matters into consideration? I think we may need to then come up with a collaborative strategy overall here at NERSA, and then also invite perhaps other relevant authorities so that we have a mutual understanding amongst ourselves and those relevant authorities as to how NERSA will deal with issues of safety and environmental concerns, and then and also then when it comes to implementation as well as during license applications. I think it will be better if we can have such memorandums of understanding amongst ourselves as the ER, as well as the National Energy Regulator, as well as those relevant authorities. But let us map out our collaborative strategy with them. Because we'll come at a secondary level. And to the extent that legislation mentioned those things, we can then see to what extent can we play a role there. That will be my suggestion when it comes to that. Thanks.
Mr. Mkwena, sir. Thanks, Madam Massetti. Mr. Mkwena.
Chair, Ms. Massetti has covered me. We can deal with it outside this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Hopulo and the team, you may respond, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. With regard to Mr. Mkwena's question on why there's still outstanding 25% of non-compliance that the licensee has not yet rectified, the reason for that, Chair, is because this 25% arise from the recent compliance inspection that we just conducted in the fourth quarter. So licensee needs some time in order to attend to some of the work in order to ensure that these non-compliance are being rectified. So they requested at least extension up until the end of March 2022 to give us the progress on how far they have went in rectifying this non-compliance. And then thanks to Ms. Massetti, because she has responded to Mr. Gumede's question. With regard to your question, Mr. Mkhize, or your input in we have to indicate how these licensees are improving in ensuring compliance in their license facilities. Yes, you're right, Mr. Mkhize. We note your point, and this will be included in the future report about the program. The improvement made by licensing in ensuring compliance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. With that, I think it's important then for us to we'll take on this matter around the issues of our own competence at all levels, as well as being able to map out which authorities are responsible for what and how do they feature in the work that we do as a regulator, so that we also use we benefit from their expertise. With that and the responses having been provided, let's then move to the recommendation, which is which states that it is recommended that the pipe gas subcommittee should note the following fourth quarter report on compliance with license conditions related to Sasol Gas Limit, Sasol Gas Pty Ltd's operation of a gas transmission in the Springs, Sasolburg, ISCO, Wadeville, Olifantsfontein, R Road, West Rand to Krugersdorp, as well as Secunda, Witbank, Middelburg area. To also note the progress made by licensee in rectifying non-compliance with compliance findings made during the compliance inspections in 2021-2022 financial year, as well as that the licensee has rectified 75% of the instances of non-compliance findings identified during the first, second, and third quarter of the financial year. By show of hands, if you are happy to note, members. Thank you, Madam Maseti, Mr. Kumete, Mr. Smunangwena, as well as myself. I happy to note. I hand over also to the chairperson, Madam Maseti.
Let's take Walter's comment. Walter?
Thank you, Chair. I heard you mentioning that we might have to conduct a workshop. However, I did not get it clear for record purposes and to ensure that the team prepares the necessary documents for PGS. May you repeat and indicate whether is the decision of this subcommittee to conduct such workshop? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, we may. I think I was suggesting that the three regulatory divisions, so that we can have we can come up after the workshop, we can come up with a collaborative strategy on how we deal with issues of safety, and then consult other bodies. So yes, we may then, there may be a workshop that is coordinated via the REC. I don't know how we can couch that. If I can get advice maybe from Mr. Ndanzi there, because we don't want to delegate work or assign work to another committee. But I thought because it's cross-cutting, it may be well placed at the REC, but we can deal with it later on. You may just record the workshop and the collaborative strategy. Let me take Mr. Kumede. Maybe he has a better way of articulating it. Mr. Kumede?
Chairperson, can I request differently before RSU recommends that I think the challenge with REC is that it's only the full-time members that are there. I think we can better we can get a whole lot more value if we have the part-time members as well participating. So can I recommend that if we do this, and I'd like to believe that it is a very good suggestion, Chairperson, but that we actually have maybe an extended PGS workshop that deals with this. So it remains a regulatory matter that allows the part-time members to participate. But so that would be my request, Chair.
I think it's proper. You may record it as such, unless Mr. Mkizo, you have a different view. Mr. Mkizo, you may come in, sir.
Yes, thanks, Chairperson. I've got a slightly different view, but with the understanding that we are all driving towards the same objective, is that maybe to look at this as part of the capacity building steering committee, workshops that we have, which will then be open to also bring in members of the part-time regulator members to be in attendance. And that because if you look at it, in almost every subcommittee meeting, there is an issue of a workshop that is being raised. Sometimes those matters must just be collated so that it's a workshop with not one agenda item, maybe with several things that are being touched on, so that the need of a workshop overall is recognized and appreciated, but that it be done under the auspices of the capacity building steering committee, because it also deals with the capacity issues as a regulator, as well as the collaboration with other the other authorities, which if the team can work well, we can even have some kind of presentations also being made by those. Thank you.
All right, thank you, members. I see a lot of hands. Can I, for the purpose of this, because we've discussed this, and I think we might be tempted to get into governance issues, is it, I think it is better to record it as an extended PGS workshop, and that workshop may include other matters then, if they are related to this, or RSU may, just to make sure that we utilize the day efficiently, may decide to add other issues. But if we say it's extended workshop, it also covers Mr. Mkize in terms of inclusion of part-time members. Can we leave it at that? And then with regards to other operational issues pertaining to the steering committee, we can discuss that under governance. I would request members if we can leave it at that, just for the secretary to record as an extended one. Then we can define that extended one and other administrative aspects of it. Thank you, members, for your understanding. Let's then move on to item number 11. Item number 11 deals with the calculation of the monthly maximum gas price. Let us introduce this matter, the importance of it, the interest drawn, the interest from the stakeholders, and the request that is being made here. And please couch that request properly here, because it will be a recommendation to the ER as a standing instruction. Please let's make that one clear. Thanks. Please go ahead. 2 minutes for that. It's a straightforward submission.
Thank you, Chairperson. This is the calculation of the maximum gas energy price for the period 31 March 2021 to 28 February 2022. Chairperson, you'll recall that PGS has previously approved for the calculation to be done on a quarterly basis. However, NESA met with ESCOM in the IPP office on request by ESCOM to have the JKM calculations published on a monthly basis to assist the IPP office in making timely decisions and to ensure market certainty and consistency in relation to the prices to be charged by suppliers of LNG for power production under the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Program. Chairperson, NESA then informed ESCOM that the IPP office that it receives data for the calculation of the maximum price on the first week of every month, whilst the PGS is convened on every second week of the month. This presents the challenge in that by the time NESA receives data for the calculation of the maximum price, the deadline for PGS submissions has already passed, and it is no longer possible to have up-to-date calculations for the maximum G price for a particular month to be considered by PGS. The meeting conclusions, Chairperson, were that this submission be drafted to the PGS requesting approval that going forward, the full-time regulator member primarily responsible for pipe gas regulation be the delegated person to confirm and approve the publication of the maximum price on a monthly basis. Unfortunately, Chairperson, I got disconnected in the previous item, so I did not fully get the discussion on the consideration by the ER for this particular request. Chairperson, the calculations for the 12-month period up to 28 February 2022 are presented under Annexure A and B. We recommend the PGS to note the calculations as reflected in the annexures, and to approve that going forward, the full-time regulator member responsible for pipe gas be delegated to consider and approve the publication of the maximum price on a monthly basis, and that the calculation of the maximum price will then be approved by the FTRM and submitted to PGS for noting.
Thank you. Thank you so much, members. This is the calculation, and it is also relevant for, as requested by ESCOM, in respect of the PP through IPPP program. So then the frequency of it will be on a monthly basis, just the calculation to help the entire industry, but also because of its frequency and its importance as stakeholders rely on it, they are we want to request that the PGS recommends to the ER It's not to approve for the PGS, but the PGS recommends to the ER to also consider this as standing instruction in terms of the delegation matrix, so that it can be done on a monthly basis by the FTRM. Those are the recommendations, members. Any input, members? Any guidance? Any additions? By show of hands, members. Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Please go ahead.
Yes, the delegation normally goes with the check and balance. There is no check and balance with regard to accountability for the concerned FTRM. I would suggest a clause be added that, or on a regular basis, or annually, or 6 monthly, that a summary of the decisions taken by the FTRM is presented to the PGS. Maybe let's talk about an annual process, which then brings in an element of checks and balances or accountability. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mkwena, for that recommendation and proposal. Mr. Mkhize?
Apologies, you correct me if I'm out of order, but I was just thinking that if that proposal is to be put, does it mean then in terms of 15.1.4, those that have been confirmed and approved by the FTM be submitted to the PGS for noting? Do we put a time period of 6 months, or do we put a quarterly basis, or it should be for noting in the month of approval? Just wanted to get that clarity. What the intention was with 15.1.4.
Okay. Let me then get, I'm not going to be able to answer that one, but let's get the team to, let me get Mr. Mkwena. Maybe you may want to tie it up with your proposal, Mr. Mkwena, and then I'll get the team to respond. Please go ahead, Mr. Mkwena.
Yes, Chairperson, you're quite correct, and Mr. Mkhize is quite correct. The idea of delegation in terms of section 5.1.4 doesn't apply, because I mean it's not effective because it's every month. I think an extended period of a regular reporting to the PGS is what is suggested, and therefore, Mr. Mkhize, as you have rightly pointed out, I think that 15.1.4 could be amended for a period that we could agree every 3 months, every 6 months, or a year. For me, is that's what delegation is all about. Otherwise, if it's done monthly for noting, I don't think it will serve the purpose. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Kumete, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Are you in agreement with that proposal?
Chairperson, there's a reason why I did not raise my hand, because I do believe, Chair, that a lot of these processes need to be reviewed and optimized. And doing it piecemeal like this for me is a challenge, because clearly there are certain decisions that, as much as petrol price is delegated and somebody else does that on a monthly basis on behalf of, but it is it's an integral part of how you regulate prices. Now, this one also, Chairperson, is a matter, I think this issue raised by this particular group of stakeholders that require the monthly publication of this maximum price is only, for me, a symptom of a bigger need to actually reform this. So, and when we do this, we then need to be able to empower the person that does it, but also make sure that the accountable body has got assurances that delegated function. And again, we may need to be able to see how that, in terms of our act going forward, of course, that needs to be refined. But I'm just saying, within the current regulatory framework, the manner in which how we do it, and making sure that the party responsible, that remains accountable, which is the ER, is assured that this is done efficiently every month, but at the same time we deliver this efficient service. So I'm not sure if I'm clear, but Chairperson, I'm happy with the suggestion. I'm happy with the suggestion that says rather than monthly reporting, because then it defeats the purpose, we can then have a report that comes to the committee. If it comes to the committee for recommendation to ER, who remain accountable for all of these things.
Okay, yes, I hope also RSU has taken note of your input there, Mr. Kumete, even in other areas as we try to improve efficiencies and optimize some regulatory processes. Mr. Mkhize, maybe this is the last comment here, and then I will also ask if RSU can weigh in.
Thanks, Chairperson. I think for starters, from my side, I can live with 3 months, which is a quarterly reporting in terms of what transpired. My understanding around the issue of not delegating to an individual FTRM the decision of ER, but making it a standing instruction is to say that in all these kind of decisions, I'm just asking RSU to go look at it to say if you've got a standard, I mean, like there's no drastic change, in other words, in terms of the factors that are affecting that particular matter, that it then becomes a standing instruction. Maybe if there are certain drastic changes that have taken place, maybe the way this calculation is going to be done differently, it is then that it should go to the committee. But otherwise, it remains with the individual FTRM as a standing instruction, and then the noting is for now. We deal with it on a quarterly basis, and we can improve if we see a change, and then we can move to semester, which is every 6 months. That would be my input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, can I then wrap up by saying that the committee will then recommend to the ER that this calculation, which is calculation that is meant to promote or enhance transparency and assist stakeholders in their bargaining on prices and to see the accuracy. So it's just meant for predictability as well as for transparency to assist the industry. So stakeholders see value in this, and therefore they are asking that the energy regulator must not do this on a quarterly basis. They must rather do it on a monthly basis, so that they can be able to track the gas price changes and monitor the agreements that they have, even in these IPP programs. So now we're saying that instead of burdening the committee with this kind of administrative work, even if it's regulatory in nature, would it not be better that ER takes the decision for the implementation and for the implementation of this a calculation that is done, which is not changing any decision of the ER, but simply to say that with all the other changes in the market and the information that we sourced from the relevant sources, this is how the price looks, and then you put it there for transparency. So if that can be now done by way of a standing instruction following the ER's approval. So that is number one. It seems members are fine with that. In addition, members are saying, then if we do so, let there be checks and balances, because the committee must be responsible for whatever is communicated out there as a decision of the regulator. And that now the committee says that those checks and balances must be done on a quarterly basis, rather than by, I'm just, as a start, perhaps we can do the checks and balances on a quarterly basis, but I would have preferred maybe biannually or annually, just in terms of the frequency. So that is the second thing that goes then with that recommendation. I'm not sure if members are now supporting those two things. One is the fact that there's a recommendation to the ER that this be a standing instruction. Secondly, there must be checks and balances where the report will come here for noting of what has been done, and it must come on a quarterly basis. Are members in agreement with that?
Sorry, Chair.
Mr. Mkwena, please go ahead.
Yeah, in your initial opening of this discussion, you alluded that you will put it to the RSU to comment on it. And my next question, obviously, is that particular activity regulated in terms of the Gas Act? If that being the case, I heard Mr. Chokwe indicating that can only be delegated somewhere, maybe to its committees or not an individual. Could they repeat that? Maybe I didn't hear him correctly.
Sorry, Mr. Mkwena, sorry for the dialogue. What part did you not understand, Mr. Mkwena?
The part I am saying, perhaps I'm referring to an earlier agenda item relating to the initiation of the investigation. We had a discussion on this. However, there was a request for RSU to comment, and their comment was in a particular way. That's why I was asking the question whether this delegation that is provided, is it contained in the legislation? If not, then we can proceed. But if it is, then it still falls under that thing to be looked at and come back to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chokwe has been affected by load shedding, but this specific calculation is not provided in the legislation. It is just some ancillary work that is meant to promote transparency and predictability on gas prices. What is in the legislation in terms of Section 21(1)(p) is that the energy regulator must approve the maximum price. Now, to assist stakeholders on how to calculate the price for themselves before they bring it to the energy regulator, number one. Number two, to monitor if the suppliers adhere to the right price when they make adjustments. So it's for two things. Now, we then said, let's do some additional work ourselves as the regulator, which is to calculate this and then put it out there to stakeholders. So it is not in the legislation. It is just the work that we are doing to just improve the understanding and to empower stakeholders. That is all on this one, Mr. Mkwena. I'm not sure if maybe RSU would want to add anything.
Thank you, Chair. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mkhize, very quickly, and Mr. Kumede. Are you approving, Mr. Mkhize?
Yeah, I'm supportive, I'm covered, but the important thing is that we should also spread it wide in terms of looking at similar issues. That is what RSU should also look at instead of a piecemeal approach. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kumete also in support?
Chairperson, broadly, yes, but I did want to add that, and maybe just I'm partly covered by Mr. Mkhize's re-emphasis of the point. But the point is here is that we do need to look at it even more broadly, to the extent that even says, can't this be something that even it becomes a mechanical calculation? If it is a mechanical calculation, that it gets published like we publish BFP in terms of prices every day or something like that. So there may be elements, and other regulatory bodies in the world do this. EIA, for instance, in the US, every Tuesday publishes inventories of gas, and that everybody looks at. and it corrects the prices in the market. So we should be looking at something similar ourselves, Chair. But I'm in support, Chair.
All right, thank you very much, members. Then just to make sure that we approve all of the recommendations are that the PGS is requested to note the maximum gas price that is calculated using the competitive benchmark as shown in Annexure A. That is the first noting. And then the second noting by the committee is the maximum gas price calculated using the JKM as provided for in the pass-through approach of the methodology, and that is contained in Annexure B. Now, the third recommendation is for the PGS to recommend, if I can just emphasize those words, for the PGS to recommend that ER approves going forward that the FTRM responsible for gas be delegated to confirm the approvals of the publication and calculation of this price on a monthly basis as a standing instruction. And then the fourth thing is that the calculated maximum gas price be confirmed and approved by the FTRM and be submitted to the PGS on a quarterly basis for noting that the maximum gas price for 12 months period ended 28 January 2022 be published on the NERSA website. By show of hands, members, for all those recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mukwena, Mr. Mkhize, and Mr. Gumede also support. Thank you, members. And that is also approved in addition to the comments made by by members on the other things that need to be considered here. And then we move on to, this is the next calculation, the calculation of the maximum gas price for the period January 2021 to February. Please take the matter as read.
Thank you, Chairperson. This one is similar to the previous item. This one, Chairperson, is for the period up to January 2022, excuse me, Chairperson, whereas the one we just went through is for the period up to February 2022. So, Chairperson, here the recommendation is to request PGS to note the calculations as reflected in Annexure A for the competitive benchmark approach, and to note the calculations as reflected in Annexure B for the pass-through approach, and for the PGS to approve the publication of the maximum price calculations on the NERSA website. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Members, it is the same as the previous one. The only difference is the month, simply because stakeholders have requested us to approve on a monthly basis. Hence, we have this January one as well as the February one that we have considered. If members can approve similar recommendations, that this calculation be noted and be published, but also the standing instructions as articulated in the previous one is also applicable here. Are members happy to approve as such? Mr. Gumede? Okay. Mr. Gumede, Mr. Mukwena, Mr. Mkhize, also happy to approve? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I also approve. That is item number 12. And then we move on to item number 13. Item number 13 is the follow-up report concerning the global development on hydrogen as an energy carrier and the role of gas in the energy transition. Can we get Ms. Khoza to introduce and make emphasis on the key issues of this report?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, members and the colleagues. Chairperson, just to flag, I'm using a hotspot, so if I'm not audible, you will let me know. This report, as you've said, it's the follow-up report concerning the global developments on hydrogen, and it is supplementary to the work that we did in 2021 in order to assist the energy regulator to better understand the whole concept of hydrogen being used as an energy carrier.
Sorry to interject. Chair, we still have two hands. I'm not sure if they are lingering or they need to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. I think they are lingering because they did not lower their hands after the approval. Thanks, Mr. Mabunda. You may proceed, Ms. Koza.
Oh, thank you, Chairperson. As I was saying, this report is supplementary to the work that we did in 2021 in order to assist the energy regulator to better understand the concept of hydrogen being used as an energy carrier and to also look at its potential impact on gas. Chairperson, for this year, we just added another component which we did not look at last year, to look at the role of gas in the energy transition, and I will explain below why this is important. So I will take the report as read and just highlight that in this report, we are addressing the issues of hydrogen safety, technology cost, and efficiencies that members, when they considered the report in 2021, both at PGS and ER, requested that we should further explore in detail. And we are also highlighting the emerging hydrogen regulatory policies in leading markets such as the EU. This is very important for us because we usually look at this market for benchmarking purposes. And it's the EU, Australia, and South Korea. If I were to just highlight on the EU, for instance, they have just released their hydrogen and gas market decarbonization package in December 2021, which is aimed at facilitating the introduction of hydrogen, low carbon, and other renewable gases in their energy system. And they have also classified gas and nuclear as green energy in their EU taxonomy regulation. So we are also in this report highlighting the changing narrative concerning the future role of gas in the energy transition. Members will recall that in the 2021 report, I'm seeing a note here from Walter. I don't know what I should proceed. In the 2021 report, we highlighted the scenario where scenarios that were rather promoted at the time to completely phase out natural gas or fossil gas in the energy system even before 2030. But that narrative has since changed, or it is actually changing. Gas is now seen as part of the solution for reaching the net zero emissions target by 2050. The International Energy Agency, for instance, in its net zero emissions scenario, recognizes that gas would continue to play a critical role in the energy transition for a longer term. However, there is growing consensus rather that the gas industry needs to adapt to a low carbon pathway in order to continue to substantiate and preserve its role in the low carbon or carbon neutral world. And that's why we have gas decarbonization strategies such as the use of carbon capture and storage technology, low carbon and renewable gases such as biogas and biomethane that are being considered as complementarities of renewable or green hydrogen leading up to 2050 and beyond. Basically, this it emphasizes the point that gas, initially gas was the narrative was that gas was going to be phased out. But now they are seeing that the energy system cannot function without gas because we need a gas to provide a base load. But because the target is to reduce carbon emissions, so now the responsibility is being given to the gas industry to start looking at low carbon pathways to decarbonize the gas system. So I have provided the description of all these gases, your biogas and biomethane, in the report. I'm not going to go through it, and also an explanation around the whole issue of the CCU or CCUS technology, how it works. So the current challenge with these renewable and low carbon gases is that they currently don't exist at scale. Hence, the International Gas Union has embarked on a drive to promote the upscaling of production and use of these gases, particularly biogas and biomethane. And then just to put this into context, how the role of gas in the energy transition is seen, is envisaged rather to unfold. between now and until 2030, Chairperson, it is expected that there's going to be a lot of coal to gas switching, particularly in the power generation sector, to reduce carbon emissions, and also in the transportation sector, where there will be usage of a lot of LNG or CNG in gas transportation, as well as bio-CNG and bio-LNG. And then, but that, Chairperson, it requires some policies that would sort of like promote the upscaling and pairing of renewable power investments with gas-fired power investments, because this is crucial to stabilize and secure the energy system or supply while pursuing the carbon reduction targets. And then this is up until 2030, and beyond 2030, this is where we are going to see an increased usage of CCS and CCUS technologies at a larger scale. And these can actually be retrofitted in existing installation or being put in greenfield installations, particularly in fossil-based plants or operations. And then the use of renewable biomethane or green hydrogen, which is also known as renewable hydrogen, is expected to also grow. So you would, beyond 2030, you would, we are likely to see the use of blue hydrogen through this CCS technology, as well being paired with renewable biomethane, biogas, as well as green hydrogen. So basically, that's how this is being envisaged. And then I've touched on the policy implications on this from page 41 of the submission. And then, and I also like to flag, Chairperson, that at this point, the hydrogen space is constantly evolving, and mainly because of the high innovative research put behind it to address the related challenges that are slowing the progress for its large-scale deployment in economies. And also, it is currently uncertain how the... Yes, Chairperson.
If you can try to wrap up in 1 minute, thanks.
Yes, okay. It is also currently uncertain how the looming energy crisis that is likely to occur because of what is happening in Russia and Ukraine rather, would sort of impact the global targets to reach net zero emissions by 2050. But what we are seeing, Chairperson, is that we are seeing more countries like Germany, who were were against the use of gas beyond 2030, are now like starting to make plans to develop develop LNG terminals, and other countries are likely to follow suit. And I also want to flag, Chairperson, that in our shores, the Department of Science and Innovation has just released the Hydrogen Society Roadmap to serve as a coordinating framework to facilitate the integration of hydrogen-related technologies in various sectors of the economy. The focus here is on creating and leveraging green hydrogen opportunities, but they do recognize that there should be some phased-in transition from grey to blue and to green hydrogen over the period. And then also this report, Chairperson, is here for noting, and yeah, I think I'm going to stop here.
All right, thank you very much. And I'm hoping that members have noted also other developments, and perhaps it will be important for the energy regulator to participate in those other initiatives pertaining to green hydrogen, as the energy regulator, we've stated that, and also in line with other countries and other developing countries that are of the view that there should not be the approach to introducing hydrogen should not be selective in terms of just focusing on green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen has a role to play. And it seems that debate is still ongoing in various countries. So here's the report, members. It is for noting, and as the PGS has requested last year, that more work be done. And this one also built on the role of gas as and that is also in order in terms of looking at the approach of other countries, even the EU, when they consider hydrogen, they don't leave out gas. They actually look at whether the regulatory infrastructure that is currently used for transportation of gas, whether those can still go hand in hand and build on the gas infrastructure that is already there. So it is also in order here to take this approach of looking at the role of gas as well as hydrogen together in terms of rolling out in various economies. So members, the report is before you for input and further guidance. If members have any input, you may please raise your hand and then we then move on afterwards. Mr. Mkhize, I'll start with you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Chairperson. I understand that the focus is different between what is being presented now and what is going to come under governance. But I thought that for a holistic approach and guidance, it would best serve if one then engages with the one under governance, taking due regard of the inputs one would have given on this. Because when you've got this kind of a presentation, you also need to be able to talk to perceptions which may not necessarily be factual, etc., and therefore you have that freedom to engage. I also thought that the roadmap that was presented by GSAI last week before last will also weigh in, because in that presentation there's also a talk of collaboration with government and other state stakeholders, including state institutions. I thought that portion will actually weigh in heavily in terms of us being able to then see our role and our space in that particular roadmap, and therefore being able to assist in shaping the narrative as well as the rollout of the roadmap, so that we don't find ourselves maybe looking abroad and not being able to impact and influence how things need to be dealt with locally. The rest of the stuff I will leave for the discussion under the governance section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mkhize. Let me go to Mr. Gumede. Mr. Gumede, please, for your guidance.
Thanks, Chairperson. And I think Mr. Mkhize has covered me a bit here in terms of what one can say in a public platform. But there's just one issue that a question I wanted to ask. Whether there has been any engagements with, well, let me put it this way, maybe the advice is to say maybe we need to integrate this with solar, because a lot of the green hydrogen issues are actually informed by likely over investments, I guess, in terms of or basically overproduction of solar power, which can then be able to be used as if you like free energy that can be used for electrolysis and therefore allows for the production of this hydrogen. I guess the issue is that I'm not too sure that interface has clearly been raised in this report. And then to ask the question, to what extent is this issue a policy question? And are we looking to develop an advocacy paper that will then be, because I'm not sure whether this falls in our domain. I mean, even in terms of the definition of gas, I know this report starts by looking at the definition of gas, the current definition of gas, and to the extent to which this fits neatly into that definition. Currently, at least, I'm not too sure. The question is therefore, this paper, are we looking to develop a position paper that can then be used to advocate our position with our shareholder department as well as stakeholders? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. If no questions or further input from Mr. Mkwena, I will then go back to Ms. Koza, if you can kindly respond. And also some of the input is just for improvements and assisting you in the way in which you need to look into this and view this going forward.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think most of the comments were sort of for enhancement, but to look at the issue raised by Mr. Kumete on to what extent is this a policy issue? We have actually taken the step in the next report to that report, the regulatory mapping for hydrogen gases. It looks at the assessment of, the applicability of the current Gas Act to hydrogen gases. And we have identified some gaps and also advocating for changes in the definition of gas. We will elaborate on that when we get to that item, Chairperson. Thank you. I'm not sure if there's anything else that I need to address.
I think we may that issue raised by Mr. Kumete on the position paper, it may give us an opportunity to develop one as part of our regulatory advocacy in terms of coming up with a regulatory policy. Sometimes it's very different from the government policy that they may want us to look at. But in ours, we'll be stating, the approach that we believe could work in terms of facilitating investment and developing the gas industry, and also dealing with issues of security of supply and all of the other environmental issues. It presents us with the opportunity to do so, that position paper, as part of our advocacy, if we were to look into that and decide properly how we're going to structure our themes and focus of that paper, and then come up with the findings on those themes and map out the regulatory tools and measures that policymakers may need to consider when they look into these kind of things, and then also come up with some recommendations of some sort. So I guess perhaps that's what Mr. Kumete and the other members are referring to. I think also the input from Mr. Mkhize is also one which you need to look at, and it is for guidance and improvements as you're gonna come up with another report, perhaps of this nature in the foreseeable future. And then maybe the other emphasis that you may want to clarify here is the interface between solar and hydrogen, and that's the point that Mr. Kumede made. You may want to clarify that point. Ms. Koza, quickly, and then we move to recommendations.
Thank you, Chairperson. We do touch on those issues throughout the report, between this one and the report that we did in 2021, because as I've said, I did not go back and look at the issues that were discussed in 20, but I just built up on that. So we are very much aware that the green hydrogen will we will definitely come out. They are actually looking at upscaling renewable energy, particularly from solar and wind. And even the hydrogen society roadmap, it also builds on that as well. So if maybe there's a special need for us to further elaborate on that, we will do it in the coming financial year when we look at the strategy that Chairperson, you suggested that we should do to look at the interface between gas, renewables and hydrogen from the regulatory perspective. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, members. I'm going straight to the recommendations. The recommendations are that the PGS notes this follow-up report and the additional issues that it focused on, and also to approve that the position paper be developed within the species of regulatory advocacy on this matter of the hydrogen and gas and be tabled to the PGS. Are members in agreement with that recommendation, subject to all of the other inputs provided? Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Thank you, Mr. Kumede, and thank you, Mr. Mkize. I also support. I'm moving on to item number 14. Item number 14 is the report on the monitoring of Tetra 4's Pty Limited's compliance with the approved maximum price of gas. And the period for this assessment of compliance is from January 2021 until December 2021. Please take the report as read and highlight the findings of the of compliance.
Thank you, Chairperson. In the interest of time, I will consider the report as read and will therefore focus on the select aspects of the report. Before the PGS is the report on the monitoring of Tetra 4's compliance with the approved maximum price of gas for the period 1 January 2021 to 31 December 2021. Tetra 4 first applied for a maximum price of 318.44 cents per gigajoule in 2016. The licensee has not submitted an application for maximum price since 2016 and is currently implementing the previously approved maximum price, which is based on the previous version of the methodology. Chairperson, Table 2 compares the approved maximum price to the actual prices charged by Tetra 4 to its only customer for the 2021 calendar year. From the table, it can be seen that Tetra 4 has complied with Section 21(1)(p) by charging actual prices that are lower than approved maximum price. And in addition, Chairperson, Tetra 4 has only one customer and therefore did not unduly discriminate between customers and therefore compliant with Section 22 of the Gas Act. It is therefore recommended that the PGS notes that Tetra 4 complied with Section 21(1)(p) and Section 22 of the Gas Act for the period under review. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, members. Any input on this? Any comments? Mr. Kumete, please go ahead, sir.
Thanks, madam. I'm happy to note, but I just wanted to find out on table 1, paragraph 6.7, how was that margin determined? Should we not have had a section that actually indicated, because the cost of gas is clear, but how was the margin actually determined? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the other members? Okay, if none, Mwekezi, may you please, Mr. Mwekezi, may you please respond to Mr. Kumete's question? Clarify, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Kumete, so the trading margin, firstly, it is worth noting that this price is based on the previous version of the methodology. So the benchmarking approach or the competitive benchmark approach would not have applied. So in this instance, the trading margin is in essence the trading cost. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, Mr. Kumete, I don't know if you are covered by that response. If yes, then we can then proceed.
Chairperson, I'm covered. However, I think for the benefit, especially for some of us that were not there when this how this old methodology was applied. So because now we are saying, I'm noting, but I have no idea where that trading margin comes from. I think for completeness, it would have been useful to have shown the calculation here. Thanks, Chair.
Yes. Ms. Makota, can you please clarify that for members to be comfortable before we move to the decision to note? Very quickly, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, in the previous methodology, the way that we used to determine the trading margin, is by using the tariff guidelines, because by then NERSA was of the view that the trading margin is simply determined by work, taking into consideration the operational cost and the RAB that the applicant or the licensees incurs in providing a service. However, as you may be aware, that view was corrected by the court when the decision on the maximum price was taken, in that the court then says that what the work and the operational cost and the trading and the assets include is just the minimum cost. And therefore, NERSA has to come up with a different way within which the trading margin can be determined, hence the use of the benchmark and coming up with a reasonable trading margin there. So we used to use the rate of return in coming up with the trading margin, which is what currently we are using to determine the trading cost. And that decision of correcting it was based on the decision of the Constitutional Court. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think it's two things that you explained there, Ms. Magoda, but in the simple answer there, Mr. Gumede, is that the way that the trading margin was determined, it was determined by way of calculating the work, and that was in relation to a regulation for sub 4 of the gas regulations. So we look at the trading assets of each trader, and then we make use of the work formula to calculate the trading margin. So the trading margin in terms of the profit is we calculated it using the work in terms of the old methodology. Any follow-up, Mr. Gumede?
Chairperson, firstly, thank you for the update. But I think it still would have been useful if the calculation in terms of how it was done was included in this report, because we are making, some of us that were not there are making are required to make a decision in the blind. That's the first one. Number two, that response raises a lot of questions for me in terms of what actually was dealt with at the courts. Because, for instance, if the indication here is that the way we're determining the trading margin yields a price that's far less than what would be commensurate to the cost of licensees, this particular licensee would not be discounting from that maximum price. So, I mean, just that response for me, I think, Chairperson, emphasizes the need for us to have that workshop. And at that workshop, can these things please be brought in there? But I'm just asking for this particular update of this report, that please can we see the calculation, because we are asked to make a decision in the blind. That's all, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks. The calculation of that margin, if it can actually be included in here, and please circulate this report to members for their information. Having said that, and also maybe that the workshop will clarify some of the things, Mr. Gumede, because the court did not pronounce on the margin itself, but the two methodologies that were in the overall methodology. One being the price indicators, meaning the gas price being referenced to other energy sources such as diesel, LPG, coal, and what else? Heavy fuel oil, the HFO. So that was the first methodology, the default methodology. The second formula that the methodology recognized for LNG and third-party traders was that the pass-through, the cost pass-through will be used. And then the court only pronounced on that cost pass-through to say that because NERSA must determine the upper bound, that cost pass-through doesn't fulfill that mandate of NERSA to establish the upper bound of the price. It simply states the minimum there. So the trading margin did not feature there at all it is not part of that. I think it was simply the confusion there. All that you were asking in your question, how the trading margin was determined, and the trading margin was determined in relation to Regulation 4 sub 4, which allows the regulator to determine the margin or the profit margin that is commensurate with the risk. That is the wording, the key wording of Regulation 4.4. And then that's what the energy regulator did for the margin itself, recognizing the trading assets of these, of all of the traders. Thank you so much for that input. And I think I clarified the two issues and what the court focused on, not the margin, but the price determined using the cost pass-through. All right, having said that, members, going to the recommendation, the PGS is requested to note that Tetra 4 complied with Section 21(1)(p) for charging the price that is not above what the energy regulator approved then. And then secondly, to note that Tetra 4 complied with Section 22 as there was no undue price discrimination. But also to note that some of the concerns raised by the PGS members will be considered in the workshop regarding all issues pertaining to the pricing of gas and the methodology. And then also that this is in relation to the old price, and that methodology was actually is no longer in place, is not enforceable because the new methodology took over. So that must also be noted. Members, by show of hands, if then you agree with all of these recommendations as read out to you. Thank you, Mr. Mokoena. Thank you, Mr. Kumet. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Go ahead.
I agree. Just the emphasis to nudge them to apply for the under the new dispensation. Thank you.
Yes, on that one, yes, that's why you see this, so that the team doesn't just sit back. There's a matter that is currently before the courts. This licensee does not want to comply to that the regulator approves its prices. But the matter is now before the High Court. It is asking for a declaratory order, and NERSA has opposed that motion. And we will brief you with regards to the process as it unfolds. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is item number 15, and that is the progress report on Sasol Gas's compliance with Regulation 3 sub 2, as well as Regulation 3 sub 3 of the piped gas regulations. And that is in relation to eligible customers, how they should be dealt with when they reach certain volume thresholds, and also the fact that they must now be allowed to connect directly to the transmission pipelines if some of these customers that have now reached the required threshold or the threshold stipulated in the regulations, if they reached that threshold, they are allowed to move from the distribution line to the transmission line so that they can save the costs. So it's part of what is in the license conditions, and that is also in compliance with the Gas Act. Can you please introduce what the findings of the monitoring of compliance and what action has been taken, please, on those two key issues? Take it as read.
Chair, maybe let me do that. This really just to go straight to the crux of the matter is that, as you said, this is a report regarding compliance by Sasol Gas with regulations 3, 2, and 3 with regard to eligible customer. Maybe just to quickly explain what the concept or this word eligible customers means is that it basically represents a stage where customers consume certain volumes And on account of those volumes, and those volumes are sort of staggered in terms of the regulations. Within the first 5 years, it would be 100,000. Within the next 5 years after that, it would be 400,000, sorry, within the first 5 years, 100,000 after for the next 5 years, and then 40,000 for the period going forward. So what the license conditions then require is that in compliance with this regulation, licensees are actually supposed to report to the energy regulator annually and periodically on the extent to which they've actually complied with this regulation, i.e., particularly by informing those customers that have gotten to the stage of consuming those volumes to say, customer number A, you're now consuming certain volumes that put you at a threshold or at the level where you are now considered an eligible customer. So the licensees are required to actually report this to the licensees so that the licensees can then be, with the knowledge that they are now eligible customers, be able to take advantage of that status to be able to connect or tap directly into the transmission line as opposed to going through the distribution line. And I think amongst the benefits of that is that if they are able to tap onto a transmission line, they are able to avoid other challenges that we've stated and brought before the committee in the past, things such as the fact that the distribution tariff is not regulated. And we've seen in the past a lot of the customers moving away from distribution towards transmission to avoid that distribution tariff. So Chairperson, in terms of compliance, then this report states that Soso Gas has complied with the requirement in the sense that all these 5 customers that became eligible customers were duly informed by the licensee, and they were even explained and clarified in terms of the benefits of being an eligible customer. That's in a nutshell, Chairperson, what the report really states. So there has been due compliance on the part of the licensee with regard to this requirement. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Mr. Normal, if you can clarify the last part regarding whether these customers that have been identified won't find it easy to switch from the distribution pipeline to the transmission pipeline so that these cost savings that you have mentioned can then be realized and can be a reality, can be recognizable. Is there any transmission pipeline that is closer to these customers such that they don't need to incur cost in connecting, or a significant cost in connecting to the transmission pipelines, so that such costs are not prohibitive and will not deter them from utilizing the transmission line? Can you inform the members here so that they can see the reality of this?
Okay, thanks, Chairperson. There are customers that are actually located in areas where there is a transmission line that is adjacent to the area where they're basically off-taking from the distribution lines, because I think maybe it must be clarified that all of them currently are off-taking from a distribution point. So in certain instances, in fact, in the majority of cases, there are transmission lines that are adjacent where these customers can be able to tap onto the transmission line. I think there is one case where there is no transmission line, but the licensee is actually in that case in discussion with the customer concerned with regard to pointing to the customer as to what the nearest transmission point would be, so that they can then have arrangements with regard to access to that, should the customer want to do that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think it's a straightforward submission. Members, any other guidance or input from your side on this compliance, and also noting the advantage of switching from the distribution pipeline to the transmission pipeline for the customers? If no further, okay, Mr. Komede, please go ahead, sir.
Thanks, ma'am. Just to say, I'm happy to note, but there's one thing that baffles me. if I own a particular pipeline, and if a client moves away from that pipeline and taps perhaps maybe even have to invest in a transmission line, might be a short leg or whatever, which is how these things I guess get done, is that then my pipeline is going to be redundant. What's stopping the incumbent player from just reducing its price to be? I mean, that to me baffles me, Chair. And maybe it's not. It's not. Maybe colleagues can assist in trying to because that's a normal market response. What is stopping this incumbent from responding correctly? That says now that somebody is actually an eligible customer, rather than having a new pipeline installed, and already have a pipeline that is connected to this kind that then becomes redundant. Shouldn't I just respond by dropping the price? What's stopping them from doing that? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Ngumalo, may you please respond? I think also if Ms. du Plessis is in, because it's in the game of competition, and we can just see whether that kind of reaction by a dominant firm that has market power, would it be frowned at, or depending on the other factors, would it still be something that is acceptable? But if they always react in that manner, and I know that there's a number of cases in other jurisdictions, especially in the pipeline, in the pipeline plus the airline industry, where the different jurisdictions then look at that reaction only done at a particular point in time when they were not decreasing the price all along. But now that they are facing customers moving to another pipeline or to another supplier, now they react by reducing the price. The timing of the reduction of that price can it be frowned at to as something that is an indicative of abuse of that market power, so that they try to capture this customer, not to move to the competitor. But it's a whole lot of factors. But I suppose there is nothing illegal in reducing, and the choice will be of the customer itself, whether it chooses to remain because of the benefit of the reduction in the tariff, in this instance, transmission tariff being reduced to that customer, or if it's reduced, would it even amount to discrimination? Because what about customers that are closer in terms of the transmission distance to that or distribution distance to that customer, to other customers, but they're not getting the benefit? So there might also be issues of price discrimination that may arise, but also other issues. But competition here, which is meant by having the eligibility of customers to move around for as long as they get the benefit. Mr. Ngumalo, maybe you want to add something?
Yes, Chairperson, I think, I fully agree with what you've just said. But in addition, obviously, it would be a function of the licensee also considering its costs to see whether it can afford that price reduction and to what level that would incentivize the customer to stay. So all those things are things that the licensee would need to consider. But I think with regard to the competition aspects, perhaps then Mr. du Plessis can come in to clarify whether there is anything that would be untoward there. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I agree with everything that you have indicated. Just to confirm that if it would be a normal response to reduce prices to retain that customer, and it is not done, then it would be consistent with a dominant firm, with the activities or the behavior of a dominant firm, not to respond in that manner, because it might be possible to recover any costs from the remaining customers who do not have the opportunity or the ability to switch to another supplier. But you are correct in stating that there are a number of things that would have to be considered, including where the costs are recovered if the price is reduced, and also issues of discrimination. So it is not a straightforward yes or no answer. Safe to say that it could very well be consistent with behavior of a dominant firm.
Right, thank you very much for that. I guess Mr. Kumete, obviously there is no straight answer to that, and there's nothing illegal per se, and nothing that one could say that a reaction of reducing the price is illegal per se, not at all. So it's that kind of a rule of reason being applied based on the facts that are on the table. And also it presents an opportunity, I guess, for customers to negotiate for a better tariff or even a better price, since customers may well threaten to move away now from the distribution pipeline and state clearly that, well, we have now an opportunity to reduce the cost, even if we're to build a shorter transmission pipeline. But when we look at the overall cost that would incur, it is still the viable option for us to tap into the transmission line that is close by, or even if we need to build a shorter transmission line to tap onto the main line, it will still be cheaper for us. So tell us, what is it that you can do to beat this cost? So it presents that opportunity to customers to negotiate. But there's nothing illegal per se. It will be a rule of reason approach that is applied. Having said that, members, I'm going to the recommendations. The PGS is requested to note the progress report and the status and the findings on Sasol's gases compliance with the pipe gas regulations and the Gas Act provisions pertaining to the eligible customer. With that, members, are you happy then to note by show of hands? Thank you, Mr. Kumede. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Can't see Mr. Mkwena. Thank you, Mr. Mkwena. Thank you so much, members. We are done with item number 15. Number 16 is about the report on developments in the new gas sources in South Africa and neighboring countries, and even international developments that may have impact on the South African market. Please introduce the report and indicate what the findings were and observations made.
Thank you, Chair. I will take the report as read and only highlight the notable developments. Chair, this is the report on development in new gas sources in South Africa and neighboring countries for the period of December 2021 to March 2022. The report highlights some of the recent developments in the gas space taking place in the region. The report looks at the proposal drafted by the EU to classify natural gas projects as green energy investment in the African continent. Chair, this comes at the back of what was deemed as a too tight and unfair restriction around the funding for gas projects that were proposed during the COP26 conference that took place last year in November. The restrictions were aimed at discouraging investment away from fossil fuel projects in favor of green energy projects in order to reduce greenhouse gas emission in line with the Paris Agreement goals. The report also also discusses the recently published report titled "The Role of Gas in South Africa's Path to Net Zero," which argues in favor of a pathway based on the importation of LNG, which the report described as optimal because it minimizes the risk of stranded assets and gas infrastructure lock-in post-2020. The report was published by the National Business Initiative and the Business Unity of South Africa and the Boston Consulting Group, and form part of a broader research and consultative process on the decarbonization of key sectors of the South African economy. The link to the full report, Chair, is attached in paragraph 8.40 for the benefit of the members. The report goes on to say that the pathway based on the importation of LNG is less complex and capital intensive than ones based on possible exploration and development of domestic gas field or the building of the pipeline from to import gas from the northern Mozambique. It also concludes that gas can, if affordably supplied, play a role as transition fuel to replace more emission-intensive fossil fuels such as coal and diesel. The report also covers, Chair, on the international scene, what is happening in Ukraine and the effect that might have on the gas and particularly on the pricing of gas and LNG. Chair, as I wrap up, I just want to apologize to yourself and the members about the mix-up. The version of the report that ended up in the pack is the one that is not properly referenced. I do apologize for that, Chair. We are requesting the committee to note the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. The report is here for noting on the developments. Any input from the members? Questions? Comment? If none, member, Mr. Kumede.
Chair, I wasn't sure whether to comment or not, but firstly, can I request that colleagues, if they can check the accuracy of the numbers? For instance, paragraph 7.12, Algeria, in terms of the numbers that I have, is 80 TCF. It's not 159 TCF. So if we can check that, please. And I think also Mozambique, if I'm correct, it's 75 TCF. At least in terms of proven reserve, but nonetheless, if you can just verify the correctness of the numbers. Now, the point I wanted to raise, Chair, is a more, in terms of the development, is a more broader question here that says, and to ask whether these debates, are debates on these issues being curtailed like this? That we know certain economies, even some of the, I'll just spell one, 25% of the state resources for Norway, for instance, come from oil and gas. It's a fact. It's published. It's there. Even in terms of exports, a lot of it is about, I think it's 27% is actually, if not something higher than that, is actually oil and gas. Now, if in South Africa, we can't even explore for gas, where is this thing? We can't even explore. Unfortunately, when we shoot seismics, we don't know whether you're going to get oil or gas. Now, and I think we are largely known as more a gas, a possible gas domain, country, then we are more prone to actually find gas in our shores than we are to find oil. But if we can't even explore, why is this allowed? Where is it in terms of why is this not hindering with the possible growth of our economy? And where are issues like this being dealt with? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. May you please respond, Mr. Mtian? What are the hurdles to exploration? What are some of the things? Mr. Mtian, from your observations and developments that you have seen? Mr. Numa.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe just to come in and assist, I think some of the hurdles, to exploration, as we know, related to, environmental opposition and lobby groups that have objected to some of the exploration activities. And I think the other part that is important is that for a considerable amount of time, there were no regulations technically to actually ensure that these explorations is conducted in a way that will satisfy the broader market, including those stakeholders that have raised particular concerns around these exploration activities. But those regulations have now been promulgated in some areas, so I think that should open a very good door for some of the explorations to occur. For instance, on the shale gas, I think members might recall that there was a moratorium precisely for the reason that there was some objections and some lobby groups who were not happy with the potential, the exploration there. And some regulations were then put in place to deal with the matter. But in terms of just going forward, the purpose behind this type of study is to scan the market broadly and identify, developments that are actually key in terms of potential gas finds. It may be that those will not be monetized, immediately, but I think the important thing is just to know what holds potential throughout the country so that we can then stay positioned to be able to respond appropriately when the time comes as a regulator. Thanks, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. I think there were a lot of uncertainties, regulatory and some policy related, but I think it may be a good thing to take a look at why we did not see exploration in South Africa, maybe just so that whatever you say is factual. So it may be good to just come up with that, and also as a forward looking in that very same assessment is to now look at the environment, the climate for investment, and what are some of the levers that are there that may actually stimulate or present the conducive environment for exploration in oil and gas, if that can be done. And present to the committee. I think that would be a better approach. Members, having said that, are members happy then to note this report by show of hands, members? Thank you, Mr. Kumede. Thank you, Mr. Mkize and Mr. Mkwena. I also support the report. Moving on to item number 17, and this item looks at the fourth quarter construction progress report for 2021-2022. Please take the report as read. I'm giving you the maximum of 2 minutes to introduce what progress has been made since the last time, just on the licenses that were approved and the construction work that has taken place. Please just deal with it in less than 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This is a fourth quarter progress report on construction licenses which were issued by the National Energy Regulator of South Africa during the financial year 2021 to 2022. The Energy Regulator has granted 103 licenses from September 2006 to September 2021 for the construction of gas facilities around the Gauteng, Free State, Mpumalanga, and KwaZulu-Natal provinces. Licensees have invested about 3.25 billion on the gas infrastructure in the Republic of South Africa since the inception of the Energy Regulator. The amount which has been spent on each project is illustrated in Annexure A on the report. Chair, at the current moment, the status of completed licenses is 95. The list of these completed facilities is highlighted in Annexure A on the report, whereas the status of revoked construction licenses remains at 7. The list of the revoked construction licenses is depicted in Annexure B. The team has received the 2 construction progress reports from Sasol Gas during the fourth quarter of the 2021 to 2022 financial year, namely Sasol Gas's license for the construction of the gas transmission facility in Boksburg and the Sasol Gas license for the construction of the gas transmission facility in the Benoni area. In terms of the financial aspects of these projects, Chair, the gas infrastructure project cost of the gas transmission facility in the Boksburg has amounted to 7.2 million, whereas the project cost of the gas transmission facility in the Benoni area has amounted to 4.4 million. According to the progress report, Chair, the Boksburg construction project is 100% complete and the Benoni construction project is 80% complete. We therefore request that the members should know the construction progress report for the fourth quarter of the 2021 to 2022 financial year And to further note that there were no new construction projects that took place during the fourth quarter of the 2021 to 2022 financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, members. Any questions regarding the status of the construction work and the progress that has been made in relation to this report? Anything members would like to comment on there? If none, members are requested then to note the construction progress report for the fourth quarter of 2021-2022, and also to note that there were no new construction projects that took place in the fourth quarter of 2021-2022. Thank you, Mr. Kumede. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, and thank you, Mr. Mukwena. I also note the progress, and moving on to item number 18, which is the Sasol Gas's monthly gas volume balance report for the month of January 2022. Only 1 minute for this specific report. It's a straightforward report. Please highlight the key things on this report. Just go straight to the key issues.
Thank you, Chair. Just to highlight on the report, or maybe let me start by the purpose of the submission is to request Pipe Gas Subcommittee to note the Sasol Gas Volume Balance Report for the month of January 2022. During this month, Sasol imported approximately 12 million gigajoules of natural gas to South African market. The percentage variance for January was negative 0.18%, which is within acceptable limits of agreed international benchmark of 1%. No significant changes when comparing the supplied volumes from month to month. That is when we're looking at Annex 3, that is on page 15. It is therefore recommended that Pipe Gas Subcommittee to note Sasol Gas Volume Balance Report for the month of January 2022. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mkhize, do you have any input?
No, I don't have the input. I had wanted to input on the previous submission. On this one, I'm happy to note the input that I had was that when it comes to these reports, it would help to also compare with previous periods. You know, the issue that I think even at PPS yesterday, we talked about the issue of comparison and trending, to be able to see what the trends are. We compare, for example, on the issue of HDSA. There is a general perception that there is a regression in the space. And it would be important not to go according to subjective views or comments, but to get to see what is actually happening. Are we really regressing, or there's progress made? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Members, are there any other input now on this specific one? I take note of that input from Mr. Mkhize, which is also applicable on to the previous report on the construction of gas facilities, just to ensure that we incorporate a trend there, and so that we can see what are some of the improvements that are made, and also on issues pertaining to HDSA. That will be in compliance with the Gas Act as well, unless we also have a separate report for that, just to see the benefits that construction work has on in terms of ensuring employment of the HDSAs, or even ownership by the HDSAs. That is the input with regards to that report, but we are not there now, but we are noting it so that it is taken into consideration in the next report. On this one, monthly volume balance, everything seemed to be in order in terms of the volumes that were imported, and as well as the variance. Members, if there's no input, by show of hands, if you are not happy to note the monthly volume balance for the month of January. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Mkwena, and thank you, Mr. Kumede. At this stage, members, this was the last report to consider during for the open meeting, and I would like to then thank the stakeholders that were following these proceedings. And I would like to then say thank you for that. And at this point in time, we'll stop the live streaming so that we can then consider governance reports. Thank you, everyone. And Mr. Mateja, if you can